Core values are an important part of the employee experience. They inform how we make decisions. They inform how we relate to each other. They inform pretty much every part of our workday. But it's not always easy to go from some pretty words on a website to actual behaviors. So today we are diving in around 4 strategies that you can use to help bring your values to life in your teamwork. Welcome to the Modern Manager. I am Mamie Camper-Stewart, and every week I share tips and strategies to help managers build strong, thriving teams. Now, before we dive in, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button so that you never miss a video. First off, if you don't already have team values, I just want to take a second to reiterate how important it is that you spend some time crafting team values together. We all are bringing our personal values into work every single day. So we have values, they just might not be shared and they might not be articulated in a way that we can refer to them. So you do want to spend some time getting really clear with your team about what values are important to you. They may even be the same as what your company values are, but you might have some unique to your team. So don't take it for granted that everybody just knows what the values are. Spend some time clarifying them because those values will set you up for good collaborative practices for the rest of your team's work. All right. Strategy number 1 is to incorporate your values into the activities that you are already doing with your team. This might look like how we make decisions, how we run our meetings, how we give feedback, how we handle conflict. Everything that you're already doing can be infused and informed by your values. So you can really think through what would it look like if our decision-making practice or our meetings were embodying our values. To do that, you can just have a brainstorm session with your team. Because meetings are one of my favorite things to talk about, I'm going to use meetings as an example. They're a great place to bring your values to life. So let's say that you have a team value of respect for all. What does that look like in your meetings? Well, it could look like before a meeting, the team leader is really thoughtful about who they're inviting and planning an agenda so that everyone who's coming to the meeting knows what you're trying to achieve and how your time is going to be spent. That's one way that you can show respect to your colleagues. Another way that you might have respect for all showing up is that people come prepared for the meeting, that they do the pre-work that's been asked of them, that they show up on time for the meeting. Plus, there's all kinds of other places where it can show up in meetings in terms of how you engage over conflict or share different kinds of ideas or disagree with each other. But even just at the basics, when you talk about how to bring respect for all to life, you can see that there are particular practices related to meetings that could rise up when you have this kind of brainstorm with your team around how we bring our values into our meetings, or how we bring our values into our decision making, or how we bring our values into our relationships. Strategy number 2 is to get really specific, really granular with what those behaviors are that you are looking for when your values are being lived. Most teams I work with are really good at generating the high level kind of things. Like we listen actively. We are curious. We give people space to do their work. But those kinds of high level statements don't necessarily tell you what you should or shouldn't do. And it's not always easy to then know, well, what do you mean when we say we should listen actively or we should be curious or we should give people space? So you want to go more levels down and get really clear. So for example, listen actively. That could mean something like we do not interrupt each other when we're speaking. Or it could look like we do not multitask during our virtual meetings. Or it could look like we always ask questions before we share our own opinion. All of those are different ways of actively listening. And if you don't know what you're actually solving for or what behaviors you're looking for, the listen actively might not be sufficient to guide people to actually implement behavior. Strategy number 3 is to incorporate evaluating yourself against your values as part of your performance management system. We often assume performance management is about what you've accomplished and what you've contributed, and we don't spend enough time thinking about how you've shown up as a colleague. And yet, so much of performance is tied up with how you show up every single day. So you want to spend some time incorporating your values into your performance management system. That could look like a self-reflection where people are writing down examples for how they lived that value or how they think they've done and specific moments that they can recall where they have lived each of those values. It could look like a rubric where they are marking themselves on a scale from 1 to 7 of how well do you think you've lived this value and why. And it's nice sometimes even to ask colleagues to share their experience of each other. When have you seen us as a team live these values? Or when have you seen a particular colleague or another team member live one of these values? The beautiful thing about incorporating your values into your performance system is that it really lifts them up as something that is so important to how you show up and how you do your work and what matters to this team every single day. And it gives you stories that you can use to celebrate each other and the wonderful work that you're doing together. Not just what you've accomplished, but how you are all acting. Strategy number 4 is to incorporate your values into the different elements of your culture. So there are actually different components to culture that can help reinforce whatever kind of culture you're trying to build. These elements are things like the rituals or the ways that you celebrate, the ways that you start meetings, those special ways that you engage to mark something. But they can also be artifacts like the posters on the wall or the virtual backgrounds that your team members use. They can also be stories. What stories do you tell new team members who are coming on? What stories do you tell when you're having a tough moment together? These different components of culture can be infused with your values. You can spend some time as a team thinking about what are some of the moments in the past where we have lived some of these values? What are those stories? And let's write them down and let's share them with new team members when they come on board. And let's think about, how do we celebrate success? Is there a way that we can honor people for living their values? Do we want to have a weekly shout out? Do we want to have a Slack channel where people can acknowledge their colleagues who are living their values? There are so many different ways to take these values and bring them to life in those different elements of culture. And that just further reinforces the values as something that are ever present and part of our daily work. Values should not just exist on paper. They should not just live in our heads, and they definitely should not be just static on a website. Values are meant to be lived, but it takes some intentionality. It takes some thought. It takes some behavior change to really bring the values to life. So I urge you to spend a few minutes thinking about which of these strategies might be best for your team, and then engage your colleagues and think about your values and connecting them into your culture, into your existing practices, into your performance management system, and getting specific enough that people really know what they should do and what they shouldn't do. For more tips on how to build a thriving team, check out my website, themodernmanager.com. And while you're here, don't forget to hit subscribe and check out my latest video.